The courtroom that day was eerily silent, as if even the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Judge Clara Bennett sat sternly in the presiding chair, her sharp eyes scanning through the case file as she did on any other day. But when the defendant entered, something inside her shattered. Malik Thompson. That name, that face, those eyes. How could Clara ever forget? He had once been a part of her childhood, a friend so close, it seemed nothing could ever come between them. And now they stood on opposite sides, one holding the scales of justice, the other shackled at the feet, standing at the edge of freedom. The name, when called out, felt like a shard of ice sliding down Clara Bennett's throat. The state of Georgia versus Malik Thompson. No, it couldn't be that Malik. But then, every heavy footstep echoed through the courtroom as the handcuffed man emerged. Gaunt, hollow-faced. It was him. The same deep brown eyes, the same slightly crooked nose from that bike accident when he was 12. But now, all of it was wrapped in time and weariness. Those eyes, once filled with dreams, now looked down, evasive, as if afraid that a glance from the past could strip bare the truths of the present. Clara sat frozen, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her hand, clutching the gavel, trembled ever so slightly. No one in the room knew who they had once been to each other. No one could have guessed that the woman in the black robe of authority was once the little girl who jumped rope with Malik under the blazing golden sunsets of Willow Creek. Willow Creek, the town where they grew up, where the color of your skin decided which playground you could use, which library shelf you were allowed to reach, even who you were allowed to love. Clara was the mayor's daughter. Malik lived at the end of a dusty road where white children never dared venture. They met one summer afternoon when Clara wandered too far and found herself crying on the edge of the forest. Malik, fishing nearby, had looked up and gently asked, "You need help?" That question started everything. Their friendship was a sweet but forbidden secret. They shared dreams of escaping the town, of finding a world where skin color wasn't a silent sentence. On warm nights, lying under a sky full of stars, Malik once whispered, "Clara, if one day I disappear from this town, would you remember me?" Clara had laughed, innocent and sure. "I won't let you disappear." But then they grew up, and life was crueler than childhood promises. One summer evening, Clara's father found them sitting together on the porch. "Clara, inside, now!" His voice was firm, cold like steel. Malik said nothing, just looked at her, and then vanished from her life like he was never there. His family moved away. Clara wasn't allowed to ask. All that remained was a half-written letter, forgotten in the drawer of her old desk. Back in the present, Clara tightened her grip on composure. "Mr. Thompson, you are charged with assault and robbery. How do you plead?" Malik's voice was hoarse. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Not guilty. 3 words that struck her heart like a second blade. The first was the day he left. This one, today, was the day he returned, shackled, on trial, like a criminal. Clara sat among the paperwork and the rules of law, clinging to reason. But her heart was breaking, silently, completely. Because the man standing there wasn't just the defendant. He was a fragment of memory, still burning bright inside her. Willow Creek, Georgia, in the early 1980s, was a place where time seemed to move slower, but prejudice ran faster than ever. The dusty red roads, endless fields of corn on either side, and the shrill chorus of cicadas every summer noon painted a picture of peace. But that peace was just a facade, a thin veil stretched over a deeply divided reality, where even a handshake between two children of different skin colors could spark trouble. Clara Bennett, back then, was a golden-haired girl, endlessly curious, always sneaking into the corners of the garden behind her house. Malik Thompson was wiry, quick on his feet, always with a worn comic book tucked into the waistband of his pants, and his eyes never strayed far from the little river behind the woods. They met one summer afternoon when Clara wandered off the trail and found Malik sitting under the old oak tree reading. "I'm Malik," he said, holding out a hand. "You lost?" From that day, the secret afternoons began. They played at the forest's edge, read stories to each other, raced through the river, and shared the kind of thoughts neither had dared to say out loud before. Clara spoke of the pressure of growing up in a wealthy family, of a father who wanted her to become a proper young lady. Malik spoke of his mother, a woman who worked long hours at the laundromat to keep her children in school, and of his dream to become an engineer, to build bridges that led to bigger, freer worlds. Their friendship was a miracle, one that defied the side eyes from neighbors, the unspoken warnings from teachers, and the cold, hard gazes of adults whose silence alone could freeze a child in place. But miracles don't last forever. The summer Malik turned 13, Clara's father caught them laughing on the porch, like there was nothing else in the world but that moment. He didn't shout, he didn't raise a hand, but his silence, sharp, icy, absolute, made Clara's skin crawl. "Clara, inside, now!" She stood up, looked back at Malik, who was now on his feet, twisting the hem of his shirt. "Go," he whispered. "You have to listen to him." Clara walked into the house, but her heart, it stayed behind, forever, on that porch step. Weeks later, Malik's family moved away. No goodbyes, no address, no trace. Clara wrote him a letter about the comic they hadn't finished, the oak tree still waiting for someone to carve their names into it, and the promise they once made, we won't let each other disappear. But the letter was never sent. It stayed in her desk drawer, fading with time, like the memory of the boy who once made her believe in beauty in a world split down the middle. Time passed. Clara grew up, went to law school, became one of the youngest white judges in the state. That success came at a price, burying every raw emotion under a polished armor of composure and justice. Malik vanished from every radar for almost 2 decades. Sometimes, Clara still thought of him, not as pain, but as a dream she never fully woke from. And now, the boy who once sat under the oak tree had returned, not with books in hand, but shackles on his wrists and a criminal record spread thick across a courtroom table. Clara wondered what broke along Malik's path, and had she been part of that breaking? But this was no time for nostalgia. As a judge, she was duty-bound to detach herself from all personal connections. Yet in her heart, Clara knew, you cannot judge a person by a few cold lines on paper. Malik had once been a boy who listened deeply, dreamed boldly, and showed a quiet kindness the world rarely noticed. He couldn't possibly be the man society was now trying to brand him as. And if there was anything Clara could do to stop the system from grinding down yet another soul, she knew this was the moment to begin. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about violence, about a man who chose to hurt and steal, a man who thought he could get away with it. Prosecutor Richard Powell paced slowly, his eyes sweeping across each juror like needles threading into their subconscious. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed with a thud in the thick, heavy air of the courtroom. Malik sat with his head bowed, fingers interlocked, eyes fixed on the cold wooden table in front of him. Clara watched every movement, her expression carefully composed, but her heart thundered. not just with the weight of justice, but with the quiet agony of someone silently witnessing a past life come back to life. In chains, Powell extended a hand toward Malik. This man stormed into a convenience store in the West Side neighborhood, assaulted the clerk, and took all the cash from the register. Evidence? Yes. Witnesses? Yes. Surveillance footage? Yes. He turned back to the jury with a triumphant smile. This case, ladies and gentlemen, is as clear as they come. Clara glanced over at the defense table. Lisa Porter, sharp-eyed, steel-spined, and young, rose to her feet, straightening her charcoal blazer. The prosecution would have you believe that justice is simple, that the man sitting here today is guilty just because he was nearby, just because he resembles someone in a grainy video. But justice, real justice, is not assumption. It is proof. Soft footsteps echoed as the first witness took the stand. The store clerk, Mr. Chambers, a middle-aged man in a white shirt, face tight with tension. I saw him, the man in the red hoodie. He was yelling, then jumped the counter. I didn't see his face clearly, but his build looked a lot like the defendant's. Lisa stepped forward, gaze cool as ice. Mr. Chambers, you said the man was wearing a red hoodie? Yes, he replied, blinking rapidly. And did you see his face clearly? Not really. The lighting was poor, and he had the hood up. Lisa nodded, pausing just enough. So, to be clear, you cannot say with certainty that the person you saw was Malik Thompson? He hesitated. I think it was him. Lisa delivered her final line like a blade. You think? Not no. Thank you. No further questions. Clara caught the subtle shift in Malik's shoulders. A small release. A breath that barely disturbed the air. But she knew. This battle had only just begun. The next piece of evidence flickered onto the courtroom screen. A security video. Blurry. Unsteady. Poor lighting. A figure in a red hoodie entered the store. No face. No voice. Just chaos. And then the figure disappeared off frame. Powell hammered the point home. Ladies and gentlemen, the man in that video is the defendant. There can be no doubt. Lisa, sharp as ever, countered. No face, no fingerprints, no DNA. And Malik Thompson was arrested wearing a black jacket. She turned to the jury. We do not convict people because they look like someone. That is not justice. That is bias. Clara's eyes met Malik's. The man who now sat as if dragged back into a story he was never allowed to finish. A ghost of himself, summoned not to relive his memories, but to star in a tragedy someone else had written for him. The court recessed for lunch. Clara retreated to her chambers, her mind a whirl of noise and ghosts. Margaret, her assistant, leaned in gently. Judge Bennett, are you all right? You seem off today? Clara offered a faint nod. I'm fine, just a lot on my mind. But inside everything was chaos, a battlefield of memories and questions without answers. The trial resumed that afternoon. The jury leaned forward, tension thick in the air, and Clara, through each question, each objection, each piece of evidence, listened not only as a judge sworn to fairness, but as someone searching in every detail for a sliver of light that could rescue her belief in the goodness of people. And in a past she once thought safely buried, but which now whispered, you were part of this story all along. The courtroom that afternoon was thick, not just with heat or tension, but with something heavier. The air no longer felt like something you breathed in. It felt like concrete suspended above everyone's heads, ready to fall. The jury was shifting, subtly, but clearly. Those firm, decisive expressions from the morning had softened into something else. Doubt. And Clara could feel it. She didn't need a degree in psychology to read the thought behind their eyes. Did we get the wrong guy? Then Lisa Porter played her next card, the arrest itself, the key witness. Officer Daniel Harris, the man who had handcuffed Malik just minutes after the robbery. Harris took the stand, a large, broad-shouldered presence, like a man carved from asphalt and patrol grit. His voice was flat, clipped, the kind of tone that sounded more at home on a sidewalk than in a courtroom. Lisa approached him with the precision of a sculptor, each question a chisel. Officer Harris, what time did you apprehend Mr. Malik Thompson? About 8:15 p.m.
And where did this happen? 2 blocks from the store that was robbed. Was he running? No, he was walking, slowly. Did you find a red hoodie on him or nearby? No. Lisa nodded slightly, her voice quiet but cutting. So, officer, did you find any physical evidence? Clothing, markings, a weapon, linking Mr. Thompson to the crime scene? Harris hesitated. No, but he matched the description, and he had cash on him. Lisa didn't miss a beat. So you concluded he was the suspect because he's black near the scene and had money in his pocket? We followed protocol, Harris said tightly. Protocol, Lisa repeated, her voice narrowing like a blade. What protocol? The one that teaches skin color as probable cause? She turned to the jury. We cannot let protocol replace critical thinking. A person cannot be guilty just for being in the wrong place, or having the wrong skin. Clara felt something twist deep in her chest. Lisa wasn't saying anything Clara hadn't heard before, but here now in this courtroom, with Malik sitting silently in his prison uniform, those words landed differently. They ached. She remembered walking past Malik as a child, remembering how store clerks would follow him with their eyes while pretending not to. Even then, Clara had felt anger, but she'd said nothing. And now that silence sat in front of her, shackled, accused, and exhausted. Lisa pressed on. No red hoodie, no blood, no solid witness identification, no fingerprints. And the video? Ladies and gentlemen, that footage has a doctored timestamp, as confirmed by an expert we've brought in. Clara's head snapped up. Expert witness? She hadn't been informed of this. Lisa introduced the specialist, a digital imaging analyst, who calmly testified that the surveillance footage had been overwritten, time-stamped inconsistently, and showed a figure that could be at least 3 inches shorter than Malik Thompson. Powell tried to object. This is merely opinion, not enough to disqualify the footage. Lisa didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply returned to her seat, eyes still blazing with that stubborn, clear-eyed belief in truth. And Clara saw it, that belief, the kind Clara herself once carried into law school, like a torch. Before the endless case files, the burnt-out colleagues, the verdicts that made her sick, ground it down. And now Malik took the stand. He rose slowly, the clinking of chains sounding like some grim symphony of fate. His voice wasn't loud, but each word landed like a brick laid on the raw foundation of truth. I've made mistakes in my life, he began. But that night I was just walking home from a friend's place. I didn't know anything about the store. The cops didn't ask. They just looked at me and decided I was the one. A heavy pause. My whole life, he said, voice steady but filled with years. I've been told I was wrong the minute I walked into a room. Wrong when I spoke. Wrong just for being in a certain neighborhood. But I've never hit anyone. Never robbed anyone. I just want to live like a person. Clara couldn't hold back anymore. A dull ache spread through her chest, like grief without a name. Malik wasn't begging for mercy. He was asking for something far more radical. To be seen for who he was, not through the lens of fear, suspicion, or expectation, but with truth. Not as a suspect, not as a mistake, but as a man, a friend, a memory still burning beneath the ashes of time. And Clara, in that moment, knew this trial wasn't just about guilt or innocence.
It was about whether justice could still mean something, even after everything. That morning, the skies over Savannah were as gray and heavy as the mood inside the courtroom. Everyone knew this was it, the final day. The day a verdict would be spoken aloud. Yet amid the shuffling of papers, the soft creak of leather soles on the old wooden floor, there was another sound, invisible but deafening, the heartbeat of every soul in the room, waiting for something far greater than a verdict. Clara entered with a composed face, or at least the mask of one. Inside, every breath felt like it might crack her open. She hadn't slept. Instead, she sat all night rereading the case files, replaying the surveillance footage so many times she could now recall the movements of each faint shadow on screen. But what haunted her wasn't the evidence. It was Malik's eyes that didn't plead for mercy, only longed to be seen. Lisa Porter stood for closing arguments. Her voice wasn't sharp or dramatic. It was calm, steady, rich with feeling. Malik Thompson is not an angel. He's made mistakes like many of us. But mistakes aren't life sentences, and they certainly aren't excuses to pin crimes he didn't commit. She paused. The room was silent. Let's revisit the facts. No physical evidence, no clear identification, a surveillance video with a tampered timestamp, and a police testimony full of gaps. The case against him? It's built on coincidence and assumption. But justice, real justice, cannot be built on assumptions. It must be built on truth. She stepped back, nodded once. Do the right thing. Then came Powell, tired now, his usual sharpness dulled. Touching words don't replace evidence. The system exists to protect you. And I believe you've seen the truth. He sat, tense. And for the first time, Clara saw it. He wasn't sure. The jury left to deliberate. An hour passed, then 2, then 3, and the courtroom felt like it might collapse under the weight of waiting. Malik sat still, hands clasped. He didn't move, didn't speak. Clara watched him, her throat tight. She never thought she'd see him again. The boy who once taught her to see the world through heart, not eyes. And now he sat before her, carrying every wound from a system that had never seen him clearly. And she, once the girl who held his hand, now held the gavel that could shape his future. The jury has reached a verdict, the clerk announced. The room jolted upright. Every eye turned toward the trembling woman holding a single sheet of white paper. In the case of the state of Georgia versus Malik Thompson, we find the defendant not guilty. Silence. Then, breath. A collective exhale that rolled across the room like a wave breaking. Some wept. Others clapped softly, afraid to shatter the holiness of the moment. Clara struck the gavel. The defendant is free to go. Court is adjourned. Malik rose. His face was unreadable. No grin, no tears, no fist raised. Just a small nod, as if the war was over. Not a victory, just survival. Clara stayed seated, unmoving. She didn't leave the bench. She simply watched him, as if seeing a long-lost part of herself, walking free. Moments later, after most had gone, Malik returned. The light in the room had softened. Only a few clerks remained, cleaning up paperwork. He stood before the bench. "You didn't say anything the whole trial," he said. "You knew me. So why?" Clara swallowed, her eyes never leaving his. "Because if I had," she whispered, "the trial could have been thrown out. It would have looked biased. I had to stay silent, to give you a fair chance." Malik said nothing. His gaze softened, but didn't weaken. "Fair," he echoed. "I've never seen what fair looks like in my life." Clara stepped down, for the first time all trial, leaving the bench to stand beside him. As equals. As people. Not titles. Not roles. Not ghosts. "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm sorry." He nodded. "I don't blame you. But you see now, silence doesn't save anyone. If you want change, stop being silent." Then he turned, walked through the heavy wooden doors, not as a victor, but as a survivor. Clara stood there alone, but not the same Clara who once stayed quiet behind her father's door, not the girl who shut herself away in obedience and fear. Now she knew. The gavel in her hand wasn't just a symbol of law. It was an opportunity. And if she was brave enough, it could become a weapon against the very injustice she had once been too afraid to name. The story of Clara and Malik is more than just a courtroom drama. It's a collision of two halves of memory, one buried, one never given a name. They were once just kids, believing the world could change if you were kind enough, honest enough. But the world taught them a crueler truth. Only the quiet get to live in peace. And in that silence, no one wins. When Clara struck the gavel to end the trial, she wasn't just setting Malik free. She was returning something to herself, her belief, her courage, and a promise made under summer skies long ago. We won't let each other disappear. Maybe justice will never be perfect, but every time we speak up for truth, even just a whisper in a noisy world, it becomes a crack in a system that once seemed unshakable. And through those cracks, light can get in. If this story touched something inside you, drop a comment. Where are you in the world, and what keeps your faith in justice alive? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so we can keep telling stories that are true, deep, and real. Because sometimes, a story told at the right moment can save a life.